Good evening and welcome back to Birdman's Tech. So in the first video I did show kind of the three different devices and their different sizes, and as I had said I wanted to kind of go into each device individually just a little bit more. So today we're going to be starting with the ANEO. Out of the three, I kind of wanted to start with this one because of the three it is the most interesting to myself and perhaps to a few others for a couple of different reasons. The first reason just being quite honestly the story of how we ended up with this device. It has gone through quite the little history with the company, starting with the Indiegogo, as most people had heard after the Founder Edition was released overseas, and they came up with the final retail, the black and the white, this being this Dark Star Black. When they went through and they did that, partly through the Indiegogo, the company was actually sold to from Uncle A to the new owner and CEO Arthur. When this was done, some unfortunate people were a little worried, and unfortunately we did get some delays, but this was because Arthur took over the company with the goal of making the best handheld out there. And as such, we actually got a second revision. So not only did we get a different color than the Founder Edition, we lost the translucent RGB, but we ended up with the black and the white, and a couple of different revisions in the cooling unit, the fan itself, to help with different heat issues. He redid the casing and shell to accommodate more airflow. So we actually saw a couple of minor revisions. And now, with the first batch having gone out to about 500 and some odd people, he has started a revision again. This being, as they call it, the ANEO 2021, the version 2. Officially, it's the 2021, kind of gets referred to as a 1.1, 1.2. Not really an ANEO 2 too much, because mostly, again, it is minor revisions and updates, but we do get some pretty cool changes. We're going to get, as I mentioned last time, some analog triggers. They will be once again redoing the shell and the aluminum frame. So as it stands right now, I have the original retail ANEO. I will be, as I stated before, getting the upgrade kit. So I will be looking at doing a video on how difficult or easy they make that upgrade to be, whether it's worth it, and kind of what the changes are. But as it stands, this is a very amazing device that has quite a little bit of story behind it. Now, another few interesting things between this and the other devices is just the overall layout. We have more buttons underneath with the different home, shortcuts, task manager, Windows, escape, the keyboard. Whereas with the Win 3, you don't have quite so many. You have a couple of little shortcuts. You got the back buttons as well. And then with the X Player, it's got its version of shortcuts, but they kept kind of asymmetrical with 4 buttons on each side. For the most part, they all serve their purposes, except for the RGB that has been kept from the Founders Edition that you can use to turn on and off the rumble with it in a mix of the D-pad, but that's, as of this moment, its only function. We have on here our digital triggers, and overall a fairly nice little device. But to get into the device itself, it took a more Switch-like approach with the asymmetrical design on the controllers. We have the D-pad and the joystick, whereas on this side the joystick, then the ABXY. The buttons have nice little click, not too mushy. So overall the controls are fairly nice. I will say that unfortunately, just like the Switch, it has a tendency to be very flat. And so ergonomically, this is not a bad device to hold, but as it is flat, it does not, it kind of sits into the hand. So long term, it may not be the most comfortable for everyone. Depends on your tolerance for that kind of thing. If you can hold the Switch for, multiple hours, shape-wise, this will be perfectly fine. Its weight is overall not too bad. However, those triggers just unfortunately do affect racing games. You have your controls overall within a nice little reach. Depending upon how you hold it, it can get a little awkward with how the sizing is if your hands are too big and you're trying to hold it to reach these or like these. But it's not too bad overall. The biggest downfall to this device would have to be the keyboard. Unlike the X Player and the Win 3, they unfortunately did not go with any kind of dedicated keyboard solution. They just gave you a little shortcut to the built-in Windows keyboard. This is not a bad option, and it does work okay, but Windows 10 was never really designed well for touchscreen. Windows 11 appears to look like it's going to try and fix this, but as of yet, that is not out, so we'll have to wait and see how that goes. Now, in terms of input or I/O, it does have 3 USB-C ports, one on the bottom for the dock, and then 2 on top. They are not going to be the Thunderbolt compatible, with no capability to run the eGPUs as I understand it. I do not have my own to test, so, but I do know it is one of the few that did not officially advertise this feature. Again, perhaps somebody will kind of mess with it and be able to figure it out, but without that bandwidth, I don't foresee that running very well. So if you plan to use an eGPU, something to keep in mind. Perhaps someone else has tested this and confirm some more on that, but unfortunately I just cannot test this. However, these are really aimed towards those who are going to be moving around. If you're going to be anchored to an eGPU a ton, a desktop PC is probably more in your favor. Now, this device does very well on battery life. As stock set up, it won't go up above about 15 watts, which should give you roughly 2 to 3 hours. You on more demanding games, or perhaps more if you run just, emulators, web browsing, watching video, things that don't use too much power. You can, of course, adjust the TDP. Up to officially supported is 28 watts. Some people have pushed it higher. Unfortunately, the higher you go, this does suffer some heat. So right now it's running at 15 watts with Heaven just kind of looping in the background, and it's seeing anywhere from 65 to 70 Celsius after I've repasted it. Mind you, the background temp in this room is not the coolest. It's about 75 to 80 degrees in here. Yes, it's about 80 degrees in here. So that is Fahrenheit. I unfortunately do not know my Celsius too well. So if you want to convert that, you can to get a better idea. But it is warm in here, so it is doing fairly well cooling in a warm room. But if you push the wattages higher, it does get a lot warmer. Right now at a 60%, 67% battery, it's still estimating a good hour and a half of battery. So like I said, even running at a full 15 watts, you still get a good 2.5 hours roughly, give or take. But it will depend on how you use it and whether it's running full tilt or not. Now, I do remember somebody had said something in Discord about it being Vita sized. As you can tell, this is going to be closer to the Switch with a 7-inch screen at 720p. Well, actually, it's going to be at 800p just because it is a little taller than the normal 720 ratio at 16:10 instead of 16:9. And another common question, performance-wise, how does this compare to the other three? Honestly, it will depend on the game you're running. I find that there are a few games that I can just not launch on the Win 3 and the X Player due to their Intel drivers not being up to par just yet. I've seen some games start now, and they'll run for some time, and then they'll crash after a while. Unusual, but something in those drivers just is still not right, whereas it'll run perfectly fine on this. And I've had the opposite where games that run very well, perhaps after an update specifically to fix their compatibility, will run just a little bit better on the X Player and the Neo with the newer Xe graphics. But overall, seeing as the screens themselves can only push out 60 FPS, they all will suffice if you keep in mind that these are handhelds, they're running integrated graphics. They will not be able to run, like a 4K gaming computer will. If you keep it in mind, they all do very well within your performance class. The biggest decider on performance-wise is going to realistically just be what game are you playing and where does the compatibility best lie. A couple of things to note with this. As it stands, the audio is not too great. It works, it does the job. It can be a little tinny at times though, and it's a little shallow. This is supposed to be revised with the new casing and shell that will be adding sound chambers. At the very least, potentially, I think there was some new speakers. I'm waiting to see on that. I've kind of watched it, but things have been busy with work, so I have not kept up on that 100%. But I do know they are going to revise the show with some sound chambers to help better guide said audio and direct it. Cooling wise, like I said, within reason, it does great. But if you push the TDP too much, then any device will eventually meet its match. So even with the Win 3 and the X Player, the same thing. They run great, but if you push the wattage too much, then they will get just a little too warm. These devices will protect themselves, but again, they have their limits. Keep this in mind. Now, holding this guy while it is running like this, where it's a little bit too warm, Overall, you don't feel it too much. The heat will come out of the side right here. It is well divided from these, thermally speaking. You can hold it comfortably while you're gaming, and as long as you do remember not to choke the back vent or the top and suffocate the device, it will stay nice and cool and comfortable to the touch. Nice big intake and a wide exhaust on the top. Overall, like I said, for gaming, controls feel really nice. Joystick wise, I did kind of tweak them just a little bit in some games to be a little more in the sensitivity range that I liked, but everybody's going to have their preference on that. So they are fairly responsive. They do work well. The only catch is I do play some games, like I said, where I would prefer that we have that finer input on the triggers. We will revisit that, however, when the new upgrade kit comes out, depending on just how long that will take me to install and how hard that will be. Overall, this company has also been, as far as customer care wise, I will say they honestly are the most open and communicative. I had a question about my Win 3. I emailed GPD. It took them quite a while to respond. When it comes to EYA though, they respond quickly, promptly, and they are very open in their Discord. I actually have seen more said by them overall than the other companies. As of late, Arthur is not as active because he is busy getting ready for the second batch that is supposed to be shipping out sometime this month. We'll see how that goes, and they are working on a new EYA space software. So we will see how that goes when that launches as well, just how that'll work out and how that'll look. But overall, great device if you keep in mind what it's doing, you know, what it can do, and keep your expectations on par for what you're looking at. So if you have any questions specifically on this device, this is kind of just a quick roundabout about the device itself. Overall, like I said, great device, great quality, great feel. Controls work fairly well within what they are, mind you. And ergonomically speaking, if you can hold the Switch comfortably, that's about how this feels. If you find the Switch is uncomfortable after a little bit, this will, again, along the same lines, it's not really molded too much to the hand. A little more rounded and thicker than the Switch, but overall, same kind of flat profile. So if you have questions, leave those in the comments. If you have any suggestions for the next thing we should discuss or look at with the EYA, again, let me know. I am going to be looking into the best way to do some gameplay videos on these different devices and perhaps see the performance on different ones. As I said, it'll just depend on the game which will perform best, but we can kind of see what the patterns are and which one works better where. But overall, go ahead and leave those down there, and I'll see you next time.